Okay, good morning, everyone. Welcome to session 2 of the CFO Incubator. With me today, I've got Nathan McLachlan, who's the Finance Director for Kimberley-Clarke, Australia and New Zealand. Hey, this week, if you do have any questions that you want to ask along the way, please feel free to put it in the chat box. I haven't got my glasses on, but Nathan tells me his eyesight's really good, so he can read them, and we'll be able to answer them. So please feel free to throw them in along the way. So as you guys know, the way we start these, Nathan, is probably giving us a brief overview of your career to date and how you ended up in the role that you're in today.
Yeah, sure, no problem at all. I guess I'll give the 2 or 3 minute version. So I guess first of all, I started at Coca-Cola Amatil, and I was there for 18 years, and that really kicked off with I got a scholarship at university, and Coke was one of the sponsors. So in that scholarship, I got to work at the Office of State Revenue, Deloitte, and also Westpac, as well as Coke. And for me, I decided to give that commercial angle a go first. So took the opportunity to join the CCA graduate program, where I did a couple of years in the corporate part of the business, and then basically went through a number of roles across the Australian beverages business. So through finance, initially starting as business partnering focus, so across the National Contact Centre, which is a really different part of the business. And then through various elements of sales, so supporting our route business at Coke, the grocery side, so dealing with Woolworths, Coles, Metcash. I went through 2 stints there, one as part of the team and then one as the head of the team. Did other things as well in relation to in our license side. So when Amatil moved into the license side of the business, spent some time there supporting the sales guys there as they negotiate with the different customers and establish that business and the credentials in that business. A bit of time, led the revenue growth management section of the business for a period of time as well, FP&A, and then got the opportunity from a Coke perspective to be the acting CFO for the Australian beverages business, which was a fantastic opportunity that I got. I guess also during that time, in addition to being at CCA, I took a year away from Coke and went overseas. And during that period, rather than just going to the pub and pouring beers, decided I'd do something to, I guess, grow my skill sets in a commercial sense. So I worked for an organisation called Best Buy, which is a large electronic retailer that was predominantly based in North America and Canada, but was expanding globally as well. I think it does about $40 billion of sales, so a big organisation. Then basically that was my career at Coke, through Coke for 18 years. Got an opportunity to get a redundancy at the end of that. Took that opportunity, had a year, I guess, getting to understand the broader, elements outside of Coke. So, establishing my brand in terms of, meeting people outside it, different organizations, recruiters, and so on, doing some education and training as well, and then landed the job at Kimberley-Clarke as the ANZ Finance Director. So, I guess that's me in a nutshell. Yeah.
And you talk about, people ask me about this key to good career management. I kind of go, luck and right timing.
Yeah,
joining Kimberley-Clarke in November, there's a run on toilet paper in March, and you've had record sales ever since.
Yeah, I can't say that was one of my criteria when I assessed Kimberley-Clarke ANZ, as in there'll be a pandemic coming and we'll have record sales of toilet paper. In some instances, sometimes it's better to be lucky than good. So that was definitely a fortunate circumstance for this year as well. So, But it has made, I guess, I've been there for about 10 months. What I would say is I came at the end of last year. It's a 31st of December year end. So I was learning the business, closing the year off, closing audits off, and then basically doing the budget. And once that process was finalized, I still remember the first meeting where we said, there's this thing going on, COVID, it's in China. We're worried about getting some of our supply chain and be able to get actually goods out to Australia. And that quickly morphed into, I guess, a bigger issue for Australia in particular, for the world globally. And then dealing, I guess, with the volatility that represented. So for us, it was an opportunity, but also it put a lot of stress into the network. So, the decisions that we had to make, but it certainly made this year go very quickly. It doesn't feel like 10 months, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, certainly it's a real year. Tell me, like 18 years with one organisation, a lot of people it doesn't resonate with. You don't see it often these days. When you started with Coke, or even when you decided to move into commerce, I wouldn't mind exploring your career goal, how you navigated your career with Coke, and then I guess, how did you make sure that you were getting the right opportunity? So I guess if we start, did you ever have a career goal?
I guess one thing I sort of mapped out early on was, I think finance is the space for me. So through doing the degree, through doing, I guess, the scholarship that I was on, there was industrial training where you got to spend time in different workplaces. I guess the finance element of the things that I was doing really resonated with me. So I didn't have a particular goal, like it was need to be this role or this company or this industry, but it was, look, I see myself as a finance professional, at least initially. And then it was about, I guess, for me, finding the right organization initially. And for me, that was, I thought I'd have a go at Coke and see what that was like. The brand, the fact that there was something physically in the market that I could see and touch and explain to people was important. And then when I got there, the culture, I really enjoyed the culture, the people, and the opportunities. You can imagine with an organization that scale, within a finance, the finance roles available at Coke, you had everything. You could go right from treasury through to transactional. You could have small teams, big teams, medium teams, business partnering to FP&A, and everything in between. So, for me, it was initially in my early part of my career was like, look, here's the channel that I think I'm in. I think it's going to be a finance career. I want to keep as many options open as possible. And I want to enjoy what I'm doing because we're at work, a fair bit of time. So, initially it was as broad as that. And then, given the breadth of role available at Coke, it then became, well, what are the skill sets that I think I need? And then how do I best go about getting them? And I guess the benefit of being in a grad program, you got to sort of sample a number of different roles to start with. There was lots of people that you could lean on for advice in terms of, some of the skill sets that you might need initially. And that's how I went about it. So as opportunities came up, I considered what skill sets I had, what I thought I needed. So that as I moved to each role, it was, do I bring something to the role and can I take something from the role as well? And that could have been a technical element. That could have been the manager that was there. It could have been a leadership element. So does it have a team? And I haven't had that before, but it may be a technical skill that I've done, but that's okay because there's growth there in terms of leading the team. And that's how I went about navigating my career. And it meant sometimes there were vertical moves, absolutely. But there was some horizontal moves as well if I thought there was a skill set to be had. And it was also that when I went to the next level, I felt I was well positioned to be successful in that role. And it didn't mean having 100% of all the boxes ticked, but it meant I felt comfortable that I was bringing something to the table as well as being able to learn something as well.
Gotcha. Did you ever take a risk when you moved? Because a lot of people sit there and go, oh, do I take a risk and maybe it's too big? And particularly in an organisation, obviously, if they're going to move you, they know your track record. Similarly, but there's sometimes that you sat there and went, I'm going to back myself to do this. Probably don't have the skill set, but I reckon I can do it.
Yeah, look, I think the example that comes to mind straight away, it was probably later on in my career at Coke rather than early on. When the opportunity came up to be the acting CFO for the Australian Beverages division, I'd been on the finance leadership team for an extended period of time, but it was probably the one step I was less sure about. Is that when I finally got there was, do I want to be a CFO or a finance director? And the managing director at the time said, look, the CFO is moving to a role for his development. There's an opportunity here where you'll have this role for, 6 months, 4, 5, 6 months. It was over a year end. So it was, right through the peak season, closing budgets, that sort of thing. And he said, I really want you to do it. And it was probably, left to me, I may not have been as bold to say, I'm going to give it a go. But given his support and then the fact it was for a finite time and so it meant I could just throw myself into it and really give it a red hot go. All those factors and just the fact that there was, something for me to take out of it and learn, meant I backed myself in to have, to do that role. And I'll be eternally grateful to that MD for backing me in and giving me that confidence to give it a go, because from that, I became really clear on, I really like doing, a CFO role, a finance director role. And so it meant for me, I was really clear moving forward that that's something that I wanted to do. Whereas at that stage, I was still, I think it is, but I wasn't 100% sure. That gave me that clarity.
Yeah, gotcha. Did you have that kind of fork in the road? I think a few people have it when they get to a point where they're going, okay, finance is a great opportunity. I'm good at it, but hey, there's a couple of operational opportunities being thrown my way. And I guess you need to make a call. Sometimes you can come back. There's a lot of CFOs have shown, but did you have that fork in the road?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it was a fork in the road, but how I would put it is, I don't think there's a massive difference between a finance business partner and say a key account manager in a business like Coke, because from a selling perspective, it's very analytical.
Yep.
You need to manage data. You need to be able to pull together a story. And from a finance perspective, that's one of the key roles that's making the complex simple, compelling, right, for our stakeholders. So there are a number of
complex, simple, compelling.
Yeah.
Great saying.
And for me, that's what I see one of our key roles.
Yeah.
Especially in the land where there's so much data and stuff available.
Yeah.
But
I'll write that down.
Yeah. No, I stole it from someone else. I can't remember who gave it to me, but it's not mine. It's definitely, but something that resonated with me. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But I guess there was a number of opportunities, with the sales director at the time where he was saying, if you want to make the transition, I can back you in. And I saw other people at Coke make that switch across, and people in my team, I helped them make that switch across. But for me, I just thought about, myself and what I enjoyed about work and what resonated for me and what I thought I was good at. And at those stages, I thought, there was probably more mileage in me staying in that sort of finance channel. In saying that, I don't think I've done anything to preclude that from a general manager role in the future if I get to the stage where I need that growth.
Yeah.
But during so far, I've sort of stayed more in that finance.
Gotcha. And when you kind of making your decisions on, hey, I need certain skill sets, I want to move on, I want to take a new role. Have you ever made some where you've kind of gone, yeah, this will be good for me, but you're going, oh my God, why did I do this? Like bad decisions? Have you made any of those?
Yeah, look, I think everyone makes those, no doubt. And having, hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
I think one...
Did you just suck it up when you made them? Or did you try and get yourself out of that role pretty quickly?
No, because the way that I look at it was, if there's something in the role that I didn't particularly enjoy, that's still something for me to take away from it. So, from a CV perspective, I can say I've done it. I've done a good job at it. I've worked it out. But it means I can say I have done that, and I don't need to. I can understand it if someone in my team does that in the future, but I don't need to go back there again. So I look at it as every experience, even if it's not something I 100% enjoyed, it informed me it's maybe something I didn't like. So for me, future decisions, it made things clearer for me. Because sometimes half the battle is you may not know what you 100% want, but if you know what you 100% don't like, then that starts to reduce some of the options that you might have in terms of, if you've got a decision to make. So, when I was overseas, I ended up being a business partner for IT in Best Buy, and their model was they had sort of 8 senior project managers that were based in their organization, and then everything else was outsourced to Accenture.
Oh, right. Okay.
So it was a great learning for me about what are the obvious pros of outsourcing, but what are some of the the negatives associated with, or some of the challenges that it represents. And there was a lot of negotiating every time we wanted to do something. It was check the contract, what does it do, what's the cost, those types of things. And so for me, it was just about learning about that, which I wouldn't have got exposure, because from a Coke perspective, it's not something that they had done at that stage. So it was a brand new experience for me. And being overseas for a period of time, I knew it was for a finite period, so I just took it as a great learning. Rolled my sleeves up, got involved, and as I said, it helped me form opinions about that type of thing as I move forward and how I would do that in the future. So I think there's lots to take away from those. When you don't get it quite right, maybe, or it's not quite what you expect, well, then what's the learning that I'm going to take away from it, and the skill set that I'll take for the next role? Gotcha.
So within the Coke structure, it's funny. There's a question later. I'm going to talk to you about multinational corps, and obviously the potential takeover with Coke at the moment. You could have ended up working for a multinational, but with the support that they gave you, did they do much career partnering with you? Did they help you? Did they have a program where they spoke to you about, hey, where do you want to get to, or was it pretty much you had to drive your own agenda?
Look, I think they were very clear on. There were support structures around, in terms of, as just part of the manager's role for you, as part of the business as usual, that their job is to help drive the careers of their people. But equally, there was an emphasis or an onus put on the individual as well. So, you need to drive your career as much as your manager, as your responsibility as much as theirs. Now, were there some structures there? Absolutely. Particularly, if you showed potential, if you did your role well, built a good sort of, profile in the business, then there were definitely things there for you to leverage in terms of, being an organisation that size. There was internal L&D that we could take advantage of, but they also encouraged bringing in external people as well to help you with that. I would say there was a balance of onus on the individual to drive their career, But also there was definitely structures in place to help you if you decided that was something that you wanted to do.
And Coke, because Coke has obviously had, actually guys, if you've got any questions too, please feel free to type them in the chat box. But Coke, you've obviously having been there for 18 years, and you're getting new people, and we hear organisations all the time where they go, oh, we've got a bunch of people who've been here forever and maybe change resistant. We're bringing new people in to bring new thoughts. How successful were Coke at managing that, do you think?
I think there's probably two distinct phases for me. So when I first got there, for the first 10 years or so, results are great, and the need for change probably wasn't there, and the opportunity to make change wasn't taken. And it didn't need to be, because there was some great results coming through. And as a result, you had people there that had been there for a long time, and there wasn't a lot of movement, there wasn't a lot of change. Then things became more challenging. And I think that there was a deliberate attempt to bring new ideas into the business and new people. And that was really enjoyable. So the first part was great fun. The second part was enjoyable from a development viewpoint, because I think we engage more broadly in the Coke network, get ideas from other people in it. We engage more broadly in industry in Australia, in non-compete organisations, to see what they were doing. And then also there was an influx of talent into the business from outside of CCA, which meant there was a whole lot of new ideas coming through, and trying and attempts to do new things. So it was I think that latter part was definitely, there was far more emphasis on that.
Okay. And then obviously you get to 18 years, an opportunity to say, hey, I don't know how the conversation went. I'm sure you can fill us in, but you were there. But that choice between do I hang around or take redundancy? I'd imagine after 18 years, it's a pretty attractive redundancy. But is that what drove it?
Look, that was part of it. I think I'd always wrestled with, as you come through, everyone says you're going to have multiple careers, let alone companies in your career, right? And I'm a pretty loyal person, and naturally, so for me it was like, well, I'll move if I need to. But then as you get further into your career, you start to think, well, am I missing something? Is there something? And it was something I wrestled with the whole way through my career. And I guess where I got to was, if something comes up that's worthwhile, I'm not going to jump for jumping's sake. But if something comes up that's worthwhile, then why wouldn't I, right? But in saying that, Coke been really good, and as long as they're continuing to give me different opportunities and growing me as an individual and as a professional, then I'm not going to necessarily just leave for the sake of leaving. So I wrestled with that the whole way through. And then when the opportunity comes up where you say, well, I can leave, to your point, I can get a decent payout, and gives me the opportunity, takes the pressure off the process, and I can really do it properly, but also, do different things with my family, and then also do some training that I've been wanting to do for a long period of time. And then while I'm doing that, still look for a role somewhere. That opportunity was too good to refuse.
Gotcha. Okay, Rishi's got a question for us. So, quick question for you. How critical is it to have experience in specific fields such as treasury, strategy, investor relations, etc., to aspire to future finance director, CFO roles?
Yeah, great question. And again, it was something probably that I thought about for a lot, in terms of what things do I need versus what don't I? And my natural inclination for me is always, I want to do everything and understand everything. And then I feel really comfortable about taking that next step. Pragmatically, though, that's just not something that you can do, right? You can try, and you may get there eventually, but I think a much better viewpoint is, there's some roles that are specialists, right? And it actually depends on the nature of the type of finance director role or CFO role that you want. So if you're going to be a CFO of an operational division, that's different from being a group CFO, as an example. So the experience needed there is different. And also there'll be some experiences where, for instance, treasury is quite technical in my mind. So is that something I need to have in-depth experience on? Or if I have a really good treasury team and understand the concepts, is that enough? So, that's the type of assessment that I went through. So did I have to do every single role? No. Obviously, the more skill sets and the more experience I have, the better it is, because then when you have a team under you that's doing that, you can relate to them better. But what I would say is, I don't think you need to have done everything. I think you need to pick and choose the things that you really need to know versus the things that you can have in your team that support you, and that'll depend on the nature of the role that you take as well.
And I assume also, if you're looking to stay in FMCG, for example, the majority, or particularly the more operational roles that you've tended to do, a lot of them are foreign owned. So requirements on IR, strategy, treasury to a degree are somewhat limited, that you need that experience.
Exactly.
It's much more around understanding, I guess, dealing with Coles and Woolies terms and the supply chain piece.
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of what attracts, like when I'm looking for a role, like I like that sort of commercial type finance director, CFO role where the emphasis on my time is, there are elements that I need to deal with, but industrial relations in a multinational, I don't need to worry about that.
Yeah.
From a treasury perspective, a lot of that is done regionally. For me, I can focus on driving the business and driving the finance team from a transactional sort of hub, but then also the more strategic and business partnering. So, for me, that was my focus because that was the type of role that I was after, as opposed to, some of the broader roles that you might see in ASX.
Yeah. So Vargy, you're looking at my questions. That was my next question. But basically, when you hit the market after leaving Coke, how did you negate the potential perception that you're at Coke for too long and so would not be able to transition into a new company culture? And I guess, and Vargy, I'm just going to, that's exactly where we're heading, because obviously, 18 years within one business, you're pretty good within Coke. I'm assuming people in Coke know you, but who else knows you? Not many.
No, that's right.
So I guess to Vargy's question, how did you find that?
Yeah, and look, and if I'm being really candid, at some point in every conversation that I had with a recruiter or someone from an organisation, that question was raised. So I got reasonably good at answering it over the time. And depending on people's opinion of whether they thought it was a positive or negative, because some people thought it was a good thing, right, in terms of loyalty and continuity and those sorts of things, it depended on where that question was asked in the sequence of questions that I got. And my response to that was this, right? As I said to you, Coke has a full gambit of finance roles. So I think if you look through my CV, I did a number of different roles. I wasn't sitting in the same role for 4 or 5 years. It was every couple of years moving on to the next one. I did stuff dealing with grocery, so Woolworths and Coles. I did stuff dealing with licensed. I did stuff dealing with route. FP&A, there was a part on RGM. So for me, it was, well, first of all, I had a breadth of role within that. The second thing was that I went overseas and worked for a different organisation and did something totally different and took some different experiences out of that. And then the third one was that when I was at Coke, there was never the assumption that the way that we did things was right. So we spent a lot of time engaging other bottlers in the network, which are not owned by Coca-Cola company. They're actually independent companies that did things slightly differently about what their best practice was. As I said to you, we spent a lot of time, we spoke to a lot of different organizations, particularly as people left CCA, went to other organizations. We really leveraged those, if they were in non-competes, insights, and we shared a lot so that we were always, learning different things. And then I think the last one was, we weren't scared necessarily to engage consultants as well and get their views and ideas about what we were doing and how we did it. So, for me, it was always, I guess, emphasizing that, for myself, I was always trying to develop and learn. So through a different career, be it in Coke or when I went outside of it. But then when I was there, it was never the assumption that we did things, what we did was 100% right. And that we actually looked for different ideas and really showing that to people as to why. And I guess, I think people saw that as well. I think when people say institutionalize, you've got one way of doing things, it's the only way. And I guess for me, I was trying to emphasize that certainly wasn't my starting point. It was, how can we be better?
Did you, so 18 years and going back on networks. So, I'm assuming, I don't know whether you were passively looking during your time at Coke. I doubt it. We never spoke. Certainly after that period. But did you, when you left, you kind of went, I'm assuming, I'm trying to get in your headspace, but
sure.
Hey, I've got a good background, good career, probably going to find a job like that. In reality, how'd you find it?
I got some really good advice so me personally, I have a network of people that I've built up over time, not a big network. So there's probably 4 or 5 people that, at various stages I've come across in my career, some at Coke, some externally, where I'll go to them and talk to them and get advice. And as I was leaving Coke, I got some really good advice from people there. So Peter West, who is the managing director for the Australian Beverages business. And his advice was start the process straight away because it'll take longer than you think. And, the other part was really, be selective in what you do, but in saying that, don't go for the perfect role, go for the one that you think you can develop in, right? So, for me, straight away, I figured there would be a period of time that would take some time, particularly at a more senior level. So I was pretty comfortable with that. And so then I just went about, I guess, for my own purpose, setting up the right process and working through that. But to your point, I think during my time at Coke, I didn't really I didn't really focus on networking. And people always said, you got to do it. It's really important. And I guess when I first came out, I had no presence with recruiters. I had no real network outside of Coke. And so that were a couple of the first things that I did, which was, make sure I started to reach out to people that I knew, and through them others, and start to build that network. And then once I'd done that, start talking to recruiters as well, and getting a profile out there, and which is really important. And I guess through those conversations, there was two things that came from it. One was obviously I did that in search of a role and what I wanted to do next. But the other one was I really enjoyed the conversations with people and understanding. I didn't just ask them about their role. I just asked them what was going on in their company, what was going on in their industry. And I think for me, one of the things I took from that was I was probably being a little bit too insular when I was at Coke and focusing on Coke and focusing on my role and doing that really well. Whereas part of it needs to be, to do your role well, you need to get that stimulus from outside. And so having a network of people, a small network or mentor group, and then having a broader network where you sort of talk to people about what's going on in their industry and things that you can take away. And their perspective on things, I think is really important, and something that I took away from the last 12 months before I got this role.
So 10 months in your new role, are you doing that? Are you going out and kind of meeting people in different industries and going, hey, what are you facing? How are you dealing with this?
Yeah, so I'm making a really conscious effort to get out there, and through it may be me being a mentor to someone. It might be me participating in these types of things. It might be me just having a chat to some of those guys that I have now reconnected with, and just keeping a sort of an occasional catch up and just working through that. Is it as intense in terms of my catching up as it was last year when I had a bit more time? No, but it's certainly something that I now prioritize and build into my schedule. And for me, if it goes in the calendar, I'll generally do it. So it's important that I just put those things in and try to work through that quite regularly.
Yeah, gotcha. And did you find you're a positive person, I've known you for a while now, and you tend to be always upbeat and really good at self-motivating. Did you have any dark periods where you were off thinking, geez, am I going to ever find this job? Or were you?
Yeah, look, I think two things. When I first started, so when it was pretty exciting. I went overseas, came back. When you could go overseas, that was last year.
What's that?
Yeah, that's right. So I did that. I went and did a marathon with some mates and stuff like that. So I had a really good time. Came back. And then sort of went, wow, I'm sort of used to working pretty hard, and there's certain routines. So for me, it was really important when I first came back, I think for my own mental health and just for myself, is to work out what the process was, what was the right way to go about it, and establish a routine. And that routine I really enjoyed, because there was a portion of the day that I would dedicate to, working through networking or the next role or whatever else. There was a portion of the day that I dedicated to fitness and just myself, or training. And then there was a portion of the day that I dedicated to family and kids and that sort of thing. So, I'd never been able to go in and do reading group with my kids. So I went in with my daughter and was in kindergarten reading every Monday for an hour. And I will never, I will always look fondly back at that time. It was unbelievable, right?
Yeah.
So
fondly about not having to do it again, or fondly about?
No, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I loved it. It was the most entertaining part of my week, watching that kindergarten teacher deal with 20 kids after the weekend and try to get them to focus. So I thought that was hilarious. My dad's a teacher, my aunt, I now have a new appreciation for what they went through each day.
Did you get your teacher's voice?
Sorry, I didn't get a teacher's voice. I think I've got a reasonable one through my whole family, a lot of them being teachers, but it helped a little bit, I guess. So I think for me, when I didn't have that routine initially, I probably found that a little bit challenging. But once I did that, I felt in a good space. And then, as I said, you focus on, I've got to get my CV right, get my LinkedIn piece right, get to know recruiters, build my network, and then you think that's all going to happen. And then you realize, the roles that I'm going for, there's not, Sydney and Australia in general, commercially, is not a massive place. So there's not heaps of these roles. And so you come around end of financial year, 30th of June, and not much is going on because people are focusing on getting the year finished and all that sort of stuff. So you sit there and you go, well, there's not much going on. And as I said, for me, it was okay, because then I decided, right, I'm going to do some training. So I did the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. So for me, that was a really good thing. That kept me ticking over. But if I didn't have that, I probably would have been sitting there going, what's happening? And then momentum started to build from there. So for me, there was probably a few elements of doubt every now and then. But then I just went back to the outcome will come if I do the process right and I work through those things and I do the things that I'm meant to, and I keep things ticking over from a training perspective, and then keep working on myself from a fitness perspective in the family and that sort of stuff. And that sort of meant I was pretty comfortable with that.
Yeah. I think Jacinta's got a question here, which is very much around, you know, your sabbatical time last year. What type of areas did you focus your personal development or reflection time on? So I think you
I think so. Yeah, I think a bit of formal training for me was something I'd always wanted to do. And it was always, I'd love to do that, but while I'm working and have kids, I'm not going to do study. And so then when the working part stopped, I was like, well, I don't have an excuse anymore. So I jumped in and did that. And it was really good. It was an amazing experience in terms of the breadth of people and the diverse backgrounds you meet there. So that was really good. Family time. And then, just working on the things that I hadn't had to worry about. So updating the CV, using LinkedIn for myself in terms of going for a role. Or as I said, I hadn't had to do that yet. So for me, that was a learning and sitting down and understanding the best way to optimize that. So things like that, and my nature is it's pretty bringing energy to generally what I do. So for me, as long as I'm learning something out of it, then I'm taking something away. So I feel very comfortable with that. So it was a good experience.
Good to hear. Good to hear. Because I know there's lots of people that we meet, particularly during this COVID period, because we really are in unprecedented times, and it is tough, to find that next opportunity in the market. There's so much uncertainty, and I think to your point, it's just staying. You've got to stay positive as hard as it is, but it's also being focused on making sure that you're doing the simple things every day that are going to help you, whether it's building a network, further study, learning and developing, which when you do, because eventually you will get the right role or a role, and you can then be able to morph that into the kind of role you want. Hey, the transition from going to case, look, being at Coke, and you use the word institutional. I wouldn't institutionalise. I wouldn't use that. But moving to Kimberley-Clarke Australia, obviously one ASX listed Aussie business with a bit of an overseas influence, but Kimberley-Clarke obviously very much a multinational organisation. How did you find the transition?
I think so multinational versus ASX. I'll start there, and I'll maybe talk about the business. In terms of that, there were lots of things that. At Coke, as an ASX listed piece, there's a couple of things. You've got to talk to the market regularly. Industrial, IR, they're going to come and talk to you about what they need in terms of talking to the market and the story they need. And so from a group perspective, there's a lot of interaction. As a multinational, you still get that interaction from a regional perspective, but it's probably they leave you to run your race a little bit more because even within the region and with the globe, ANZ's a strong part of the KC business, but it's not everything to the ASX result, right? So North America is a big focus for them as an example. Whereas being part of the Australian beverages business at Amateur, which is ASX listed business, and that was a big portion of the business. There was a lot group are interacting with you all the time. What's our messaging? How's that going to work through? What are results doing? What's the next step? How are we going with Woolworths? How are we going with Coles? Whatever the key element was, we were always under the gun in terms of having to make sure we were delivering results and being able to explain them. So in that sense, I think there was a far more direct link. There's still that interaction, but it's a little bit more diluted. What I would say though is also, and this might be the nature of the role. My role we're both operational, but in an ASX there are more technical elements to the finance stream of roles.
The group function and
correct. You have those things. You have your treasury. You have all those sorts of pieces. Whereas for us, I don't have as much exposure to those because they're done globally, and I just get an outcome, and I'll just deal with the things that I control and influence, as opposed to those other things which I can't. So I think there's probably more things that you can't drive, you can't shape as much in a multinational. You need to work within the confines of what you're given. Whereas at an ASX, you need to, I guess it's more regimented in terms of delivering the result, but the way you go about it, you can really drive an outcome. So
gotcha.
Don't know that sort of.
So obviously, what I'm listening to is ASX, a bit more noise. You're held accountable a lot more because there's market, online reporting, those sorts of things that need to be accounted for. Multinational. It seems like you've got a bit more time.
Yes.
The strategy is a bit more considered. But is there a if everything's driven out of North America or the US, is there a view that what happens in North America happens in Australia, and you kind of sit there and push back and go, well, that doesn't work here?
Yeah, and
little puppy Labradors sell toilet paper
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and look, that does happen a little bit. So you will get, so on a good thing, you don't have to design all the templates and those sorts of things because they'll come handed down to you. But on the flip side, they're handed down to you and you're expected to comply to what's there, right? So and that's where I guess you don't shape it as much. You sort of work within the confines of the parameters that you're given. But as I said, you probably get a little bit more leeway in terms of driving results. So if the monthly result doesn't come out exactly right, they'll probably give you a little bit of latitude to try and to course correct before they get involved, as opposed to ASX. If there's things aren't working, then what's happening, why, how do we go through it? So it's a bit more immediate.
And do you look at going back and looking at your career journey and maybe looking at some of the people that have worked through KCA, is there a difference in people's career journey? Because I'd imagine in a multinational, quite often your role's an expat. Or do you sit there and say, well, if you're going to be successful in a multinational, you potentially have to be more mobile, prepared to go overseas, or move because there's only going to be a finite space for you to operate in?
Look, I think that's right. I think from a career perspective, if you want to have a 20-year career at a multinational, then generally you're going to have to move somewhere if you want to keep progressing senior roles and moving forward, because there's only so many locally that exist. Now, if you're in North America where there's the corporate hub as well, and it's a bigger business, maybe that's not the case. But from an Australian perspective, in a multinational here, there's less scope in the finance role. So a great example is at Coke, let's say there's 300 roles in finance, maybe slightly more. At ANZ for KC, there's 20. So, from a career perspective, if you want to progress and move forward, you will need to move overseas at some point.
Gotcha. No worries. James got a question here. Based on your FMCG background, do you think the events of 2020 will change the future relevance of commercial business cases of onshore Australian manufacturing?
Wow. Good question. What do I think about that? I think what I would say is this: when I've never seen toilet paper on Sunrise as an issue as a manufacturer on Sunrise or Today ever before, and this year it was. And I think in part that became because the emphasis on Australian made has definitely increased, and I think rightly or wrongly as a perception that's something that's more important to people than perhaps it was 12 months ago. It was important, but I think it's more important. And I think from a government perspective, manufacturing wise, there are certain things, if something like this happens again, where they want the capability to manufacture in Australia, that perhaps before they'll happily get from a global sort of capability. So, I personally think manufacturing has been dwindling in Australia. I think it's fairly obvious over the last 10, 20, 30 years. My expectation is that consumers will probably look more favorably on things manufactured here more than they probably did before. That was always important, and the government will look to drive that more as well in certain areas where they deem it's important that we have that capability here. So that will mean there will be more manufacturing here, I think, than there perhaps was in the past, or they won't let it just naturally fall away. Perhaps it would have.
It's interesting that I sit there and think sometimes that I think at the moment people are going, we need it. It's good to have it in Australia, but there's a point where they forget about it and it becomes focused on price again. And then you kind of go, okay, we'll go that one.
I think a great example of that is not manufacturing, but the desalination plant, right? We had that massive drought. We built it and it's there. And now when they switch it on, it's like, well, do we really want to switch it on? It's quite expensive water. So,
correct. Well, they've already bought the power, so they should turn it on. It was always going to rain as soon as they finished building it.
Right.
Correct. Hey, just talk about the role of mentors and maybe coaches in your career. Have you used them?
Look, for me, I probably haven't joined formal mentor programs. That hasn't been necessarily the way that I've gone about it. But over my career, part of my selection process of roles is not just the technical skills I get from it, but the managers that I get exposed to, what sort of person they are, what can I learn from them. And so naturally, when you're selecting roles based on the manager, someone that you think you can learn from, unless you get it horribly wrong, then that's somebody's opinion that you value. So for some of those people where I've continued that connection and that I guess link, they've sort of become my informal network. And there's probably 4 or 5 people through my career now that I'll go to as I come up to junctures or as I come into new experiences. I'll give them a call and have a chat to them about it. And I find it a really yeah, I think it gives me a lot of clarity to bounce some ideas. I don't necessarily take verbatim what everyone says,
Mm.
but I will, they all have different perspectives. And then between all that, as with any sort of feedback, I sort of work through that and work out what resonates with me. And that usually gives me clarity as to, or reinforces something that I was thinking to make a decision. So yeah, I definitely use that as a real sounding board for me as I've come up to things. And even the question that was asked before regarding skill sets, as I said, that was one of the things that I wrestled with. So for me, it was like, well, my natural default is I need to know everything. And as I said, through that network, that mentoring, it's like, well, actually think about that. Do you need to know everything? I know you want to do that, Nathan, but do you need to? And that was as an example of one of those issues that I work through to work out which things do I want to focus on and which things will I either may not be part of the role that I get or that I'll be able to rely on my team to help me with.
Yeah, gotcha. Hey guys, if you've got any more questions, please feel free to throw them in. Hey, with coaching, did Coke offer coaching to you at all, or like feedback on, hey mate, we think you need some development here, we're going to bring some people in to help you, or was it more internal?
No, I've had both. So I've had, from a coaching perspective, I've had coaching from managers on the job. Coke made available to me as well some coaching, and Casey has as well, actually. Credit. For me, part of a selection of the company that I want to be part of is about the learning and development they offer, whether it's on the job, it could be the role, or it could be some of the formal stuff as well. And definitely coaching, these are the things you might want to work on, and 360-degree feedback, but then actually, executive coaches or whatever else to come in and sort of give me some ideas about, these are maybe some things to think about, because I think when you first start out, it's just get the job done, do it to the best of your ability. But as you progress through, it becomes some of those leadership skills become more and more important, and be able to, do your role through your team. And that's not, sometimes people do that naturally, and sometimes you've got to work at it, right? So for me, some of that coaching along the way has probably called out things to say, you've got this and this right, but what about this? Or have you thought about that? So I've certainly had coaching along the way and really benefited from it. Absolutely.
Yeah, good to hear. Hey, if you've had a look at Nathan's profile on LinkedIn, one of his roles was, it's a long title, I'm trying to remember it, GM, Data, Analytics, and Insights. Concertina business card, long business card. In that role, and I love that saying, complex, simple, compelling. What's your views on data analytics? You see a lot of businesses spending a lot of money saying we need it. I see a lot of confusion around what they actually need and how they're going to do it. What's your views?
Look, I think there's definitely a role for it, right? And there's no doubt if you are going to leverage it to its full capability, it's an expensive thing to do. What I would say is, from a data perspective, I don't think there's any lack of data. I've come from like the two organizations that I've predominantly been part of. There's masses of data. The trick is not the data itself and having it, it's how to best leverage it, right? And I guess I look at analytics as a way, to your point, about how do we extract that data and put it into meaningful things for businesses to make decisions on. What I would say, as automation grows and analytics grows, and we look to do it more and more through automated processes and those sorts of things, AI, etc. I think it's really important that businesses invest in the plumbing. So, the master data element, because if your data structures are not right, if your data is not set up the right way, it limits, one, what you can do, and the accuracy of what you get out of it. And it could actually lead to some really wrong decision making. And one of the tricks, I think, with data analytics is what people need to realize. It's really hard to explain or understand and then explain an algorithm to someone, right? So generally what happens is they feed a whole lot of data in, it spits out an answer, and it's very difficult then to explain that to somebody, right? I find it hard to understand it. So then how can I possibly explain it? So, I think that's a real danger. So you got to make sure your data's set up the right way. And I think it's a case of, crawl before you walk before you run, in the sense of, test it, work out, put some proof of concepts together as to how you might want to use it, see if it works for your business and if your data's set up the right way and those types of things. And then if you can make it work, then look to I guess, scale it as, best fits the, your organization and its size, because some organizations have lots of resources that they can invest in, and others are smaller and need to be pretty nimble as to where they invest their time and their money.
And at CCA or KCA, is it finance driven or is it ops driven?
Data is, I found data at both organizations. I don't think there's necessarily one owner. So I would say, from a financial data perspective, clearly that's finance. When you get outside of that, it becomes more blurry. I think it helps to have somebody owning the data relationship. So, for us, scan data, that type of thing, and trying to bring it together into one sort of data warehouse, lake, whatever you want to call it, so that you can pull those things together and really drive the insights. But I think that's one of the things that businesses are wrestling with is who owns it? Is it piecemeal across different parts of the organisation, or it should be one? And I'm not sure if anyone's really, I haven't been part of an organisation that's nutted it out yet. So if anyone has a view as to where someone has nutted it out and was, let me know. I'm more than interested.
There's a free opportunity to consult to
Yeah,
KCA. Right. Yeah. Hey, the role of finance, where do you see it heading?
I think from a finance perspective, as I was saying before, complex, simple, compelling, and business partnering. I think that's what finance needs to do. I think in essence, we're problem solvers, just with that financial lens. So for me, I see that as what we do. We're problem solvers. We try to minimize surprises in a business context. I'm not sure if a surprise is ever a good thing. So you're either surprised by something's better than you expect, and people ask, well, why didn't you know that? Or you're surprised by something's worse than you expect, in which case, like, well, how did we know that? And now it's impacted us. What are we going to do about it? So for me, I think we're problem solvers. We try to minimize surprises. I think that's our role, is to really provide that insight. I think there's the base level of things that we need to help provide, which is around governance and the transactional element. And then if we do those things right as a finance team, it gives you the right to be the business partner and really advise and provide that insight to the business. And personally, I find that part exciting. So I want to get those core things right to give us the right to drive that insight and be that business partner that I think the businesses want.
Yeah, cool. Hey, I'm just going to finish up with the 3 pieces of advice you'd share for any aspiring CFOs, FDs. While you're listening to Nathan's words of wisdom, guys, if you do have any questions, please put them on the chat and we can get to them. But what are your 3 tips?
Hopefully this has come out in the conversation today. But my first one is you need to do the role that you're in really well, because you never know who's watching and where it might lead. But equally, don't forego, I guess, those external networks, and that don't make it all internal. Make sure that you are getting external view on things. So make sure you engage people outside of your industry and your organisation to understand some of the things that they're facing, because there could be some real learnings that you can bring into your role. So at its core, you need to do your role well and be successful in it. But I think that external focus as well really helps that. So don't trade off one for the other, because I think I was guilty of that for chunks of my career. And now looking back, I sit there now after learning the last couple of years and say, actually, I could have done my role that much better if I'd done that. So I think that's one. 2, I think it's I think you need to be honest with where you are. So in terms of your skill sets and where you want to go. So I don't think you ever have to say that is my one and only role that I want. If you have that, fantastic. But if you don't, you have a direction you want to go to, then it's about what skill sets do I broadly need to be successful there. And then I think if you can be honest in terms of, okay, what skill sets do I have versus what do I need? And then start to work through it. I think that's really important. And as I said, my general ethos was, I'm never going to have 100% of things for the role, but I'm a conservative person. So I want to make sure I bring something to the table with the new role, as well as take something away from the role as well.
It's so good to have that. It's a tough thing, isn't it, to have that kind of room of mirrors, look at yourself and go, what do I enjoy? What am I really good at? And I think I see a lot of people through their careers aspire to be a CFO, and we meet them and you're like, you're never going to be a CFO. And it just causes, I think, heartache, disappointment, and potentially bitterness. But if you kind of have a lens where you go, you know what, I'm really good at this. I've got to be happy with that. I want to continue to grow, but there's certain limitations potentially, or I need to do something about it. But if you have that realization, I think it puts you in a much happier space.
And I think you'll generally get roles that you enjoy more, because all of a sudden you're doing the things that you like.
Enjoy.
So I think that's really important to understand that. And for me, for instance, for me as an example, one realization was, I like the commercial element of my role. So do I want to do a CFO gig that's got treasury and those sorts of things? Maybe right now, no. I want to do a role that I can enjoy those commercial elements. So for me, it was really important, I guess, to have that realization. And it'll be different for different people, but for me, that was important. So I think it's being really clear of what you want to do, where you're at, what you've got, and what you need. And I think just being honest with yourself, that little internal voice is really important. And then the last one I think is balance. And what I mean by that is, if you want to bring your best self to work, if you want to, drive the best outcomes that you possibly can, then I think you really need to have balance. And for me, what balance represented to me really varied through my career. So at the start, when it was just me, it was, I played rugby, did work, and saw my family every now and then, and that was as in my my brothers and sisters and so on. But as I got older and I got a family, things got different. Like, there was different priorities and things worked differently. So for me, it's really about that balance. And I think if you can do that, it means when you get to work, when you are at work, you will do the job that much better and you'll make that much bigger an impression. Another learning for me is it's important for me to segment my. I'm not one of those people that can sort of do a bit of work, do something else, come back to work and do it over the 7 days. I'd much prefer to go nail it over the 5 days of the week and then have the weekend to refresh, regenerate, time with my family. And then when I know when I come to work on Monday, I'll be ready to go again. And that was a real learning, because earlier on I would just do work all the time and wonder why I was tired when I came back from the weekend on Monday. And it was just because I hadn't really been honest with myself as to what I needed to do my best work. So
having that downtime.
So I think for me, that balance and the role of sport and the role of family and those sorts of things for me was really important. So I'd really stress that. And I guess COVID's been a really good lesson in that for a lot of people, in terms of the flexibility that's probably come about in a lot of people's roles. But I think it's something that that balance part's really important.
Okay, we've got to run on questions now. So James again. James, you're trying to steal my limelight. What's been the most memorable, rewarding career moment in your journey to date?
When I was acting CFO, and we for Australian Beverages business, and we nailed the year end, we nailed the audit, we got our budgets done. It was really well regarded, and even though I was only in the role for 4 months, the managing director, or the CEO rather, they gave me a comp saying basically they didn't notice the difference between me and predecessor or whatever else, in terms of it was a really smooth transition. That was really rewarding, because trying to do that, as well as drive a big finance team, under pressure. It was really rewarding at the end of that to get that feedback. So for me, that was probably one of the big ones.
Cool. Sean, did you consider other industries after Coke, financial services, property, with a view to applying your soft or general skills? And if so, how did that go? Also, how open are you to bringing in people into FMCG from other industries? Can I just I find people like yourself, when they're looking for a role, really open on industry and industry agnostic, and then when they get a job, they're like, no, they need FMCG experience.
Look, I'll talk personally. First of all, I would say when I came into it, I was open to that, sort of to your point about learning something different. So I acknowledge where my background was and where my skill sets lied in my experience. So was it likely that someone would have to take a punt on me to do a different industry? Was I open to it? Absolutely, because I thought I'll learn something different, right? And as I said to you, that's a big part of, for me, about what I'm doing is, what am I learning? What am I taking away? So I was open for it, but pragmatic to understand that, it would represent a punt for someone to take on me, and an environment where there's probably lots of candidates, that may not happen, but I was definitely open to it. So industry-wise, I wasn't too stressed about that type of thing.
It's funny, I've seen a lot of people from FMCG, like I've placed a lot of people who are FMCG into property businesses or businesses where there's that commercial partnering required, because I do think FMCG probably do that the best from a training and a cultural perspective, immerse finance into their businesses, and those people tend to bring that culture and skill set into other organisations that are trying to get there. Which is good. Rare do you see people go the other way. Because FMCG tends to be a bit of an exclusive, not exclusive, but they're very focused on wanting a certain skill.
And there's probably certain themes or issues that you deal with that people like. So I guess from that perspective, so for me personally, I was open to it. It didn't work out, but in saying that, I'm very comfortable where I ended up, for sure. In terms of, for me, I think it depends on the nature of the role and what the profile of my team is, right? So if I have 20 people in my team and 19 of them are FMCG, heavy FMCG experience, then I'm absolutely, whatever it is, then I'm up to bringing in different skill sets and perspectives in that instance, absolutely. Or maybe the nature of the role. So for instance, if something is less business partnering, say business partnering with the team in terms of dealing with Coles and Woolworths, if it's more FP&A, or it could be something else, then I would bring someone in there as a stepping stone for them to understand an FMCG business. So it could be from a Big Four background, it could be from wherever, it doesn't matter. Bring them in, use those skills, and then they get exposure to some of those other things, and then transition them into that so that coalface sort of FMCG role. So I have no problem with that. But I want to set the people up for success as well.
Yeah, cool. Fiona, got a question. Hi, Fiona. Data analytics can be quite a technical area. How did you equip yourself with the skills and knowledge to undertake the role? And what was your approach to the role?
Yeah, so look, I think from a technical perspective, one of the things was I made sure that I had a really strong person in my team around master data and the setup of data, because it's not something I think you can pick up quickly. So you need to, as I said, that was one of those things where I identified and said, actually, if I have the right person in my team, I can take it on. And, I can apply the commercial lens to the business cases and also the outputs and making sure that's the right piece. And hopefully that means we get an output that's not technically right, but an output that's not only technically right, but that can be used by the business. So, that's the way that I did about it. I made sure I had at a conceptual level, I had a pretty good understanding of, how things worked and how it would be applied in the business, and therefore making sure we got the right outcomes. But no doubt, from the actual technical nitty-gritty, I made sure I had the right people in my team to support me in that and advise me.
And it probably goes down to that mirror point you said as well, isn't it? Going, well, what am I good at, and what do I enjoy doing? What don't I like, and what do I need? What skill sets do I need to complement me?
Spot on. Spot on. And that's something I just went, I can't pick it up in time at the right level. And if this person's lived it for 10, 15 years, why wouldn't I leverage that capability? So,
Definitely. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for your time. Good to catch up with someone whose business is actually doing really well during COVID-19. It's not normal, but I really appreciate it. Hope you guys got a lot out of it. If you do have any other questions, please feel free to forward them through to us. I'm sure Nathan's happy to take your LinkedIn questions as well if you've got any that you want to post to him directly. And look forward to catching up with you all in a few weeks. So thanks so much. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Cheers.
guys.
Bye.